Did you know your credit card points and miles can lose value to inflation? Credit card companies often reduce the redemption value of your points and miles. Now, imagine a credit card with rewards that can grow in value. With the Gemini credit card, you can earn Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos instantly with no annual fee. Every swipe at the store or gas pump earns you instant rewards deposited straight to your account. Plus, sign up now for a $200 Bitcoin bonus to kickstart your rewards. Visit Gemini.com/card today. Check out the link in the description for more information on rates and fees. Again, if you're looking to invest in Bitcoin but don't know where to start, the Gemini credit card makes it easy.
A warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Big XII Family Podcast. We've got ourselves an excellent podcast today as we're going to be taking a look at the Big 12. It's another one of our conference previews. We've got 4 conference previews left. This is one of them. So after this, all we'll have left is the Big East, the SEC, and the Big 10. And we have a big-time guest joining me. Drake Toll. He does great work with the Locked On Big 12 podcast. He's going to be joining me in segment number 2. I know that he does an amazing job taking a look at this conference. He is actually the play-by-play man when it comes to party animals as well. For those that love baseball, that's a part of the Savannah Bananas League, so that's a lot of fun, and we're going to be chatting with Drake about all 16 teams, some of the nooks and crannies of it, the coaching changes, and just take a look at what we've all got in this conference. Here in segment number 1, I will be giving you guys a look at the styles of play and the betting trends of the Big 12, and then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for this wonderful conference. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to access their funds whenever and wherever. With EdgeBoost, 100% of gambling transactions do get approved, and with regards to EdgeBoost as well, they give you cashback rewards as you utilize their service as well. When you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G, that'll get you a $1 for $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's get down to business and take a look at a Big 12 that does have a wide range of teams, some that are very much more up-tempo, some that are a little bit more low and slow. We saw a few teams that decide, you know what, they're going to crank things up. Steve Lutzen, year number 1 over at Oklahoma State, he got his team cranked up tempo, 31st in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and Johnny Dawkins typically has not been super up tempo over at Central Florida. Last year, they were number 5 in the country, though, in terms of total possessions per game. Obviously, adding in there the West Coast schools did cause for a little bit of change over there, and they did add in there one very up-tempo team in Arizona, 55th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Now, what Alex Jensen does over at Utah is going to be intriguing because Utah was really a neither here nor there team, 119th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Over at Arizona State, they were a quite fast team as well. They were number 51 in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and with all the changeover, you've had also some very, very slow teams come into this conference as well. Houston being the main of them, 359th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And if you do take a look at the overall rankings and the teams that were really able to fly and were able to have a lot of success in this conference, a lot of them are more of your low and slow teams. Now, Iowa State, they did crank things up a little bit more last year. They were up to 89th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And then the Kansas schools, Kansas and Kansas State, 2 very intriguing bunches. As for Kansas, 102nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. This was very surprising with Kansas State 215th in the country in terms of total possessions per game last year. Really slowed things down as Jerome Tang just has not been able to get necessarily the, shall we say, footing that he's been hoping for over there. And with TCU, they did slow things down as well a little bit last year, 236th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And in the Big 12, you do have a lot of teams that are very much committed to defense. Obviously, you've got some very rock-solid offenses, but I mean, it's headlined by the fact that Houston was number 1 in the country in terms of total possessions per game, just very rock solid with that regard. But I mean, even a lot of the other teams that were able to make their run in the NCAA tournament they really pushed with regards to their defense as well. West Virginia was another team that was well outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game last year. With Russ Hodge coming out over to North Texas, you can expect much more of the same. They were 18th in the country in terms of the points allowed on a per possession basis. Iowa State was number 16 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Kansas, even though it was a down year, they were still solid on defense. It was really the offense that costed them. They were number 31 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. After that, you do see a little bit of a cliff fall as a team like Arizona can sometimes be a little bit hit or miss on the defensive side of things. They were 96th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and then you did notice the teams that were more towards the bottom of the conference, they were the teams that struggled on defense. Arizona State, 225th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Colorado wasn't completely awful, but still 140th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That's not going to cut it. TCU was hovering more around about 74th, which isn't too bad, but when you had the offense they had with TCU last season, you needed that to be a little bit better as well. And then you saw Oklahoma State just not be able to play any defense whatsoever last year, more around 172nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. So very much an up-down all-around conference. And for Baylor, they took a massive step back with them being 167th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis as well. And then you do have some offensive dynamos because we always talk about Houston and how great they are with regards to their defense, and this is still one of the most efficient offenses as well in all of college basketball. Certainly not quite as dominant as they are on the defensive side of things, but Houston last season, in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, they checked in number 26 in all of college basketball. Arizona was obviously one of the better offensive teams in the country. They were number 18 in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. But Texas Tech, who under Graham McCasland, they played a little bit more towards the middle of the country in terms of total possessions per game. They turned out to be number 7 in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And we did see much better offense out of Iowa State last season as well. They are going to be losing some of those guards from a season ago, but still, they were number 35 in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. You saw Kansas State go all the way down to 218th in the country in terms of points per possession, and Kansas, they really struggled as well, 118th in the country in terms of points per possession. For TCU, it's just all sorts of rough for them in terms of just trying to be able to find some offensive flow and some offensive rhythm, 308th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and despite Central Florida being the fastest team in terms of total possessions per game in the conference, they were just 145th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. As with this conference, you did notice that the teams that also were able to rebound were the teams that were able to ascend towards the top, and the teams that were not able to rebound, well, they were the teams that really had some issues. Arizona was right there at the top. They were number 12 in the country in terms of rebound percentage, so did a nice job locking down there. Houston was 22nd in the country in terms of rebound percentage, so they once again were able to do a good job there. And BYU, I really haven't talked about, they were again one of your most efficient offenses in all of college basketball, which I neglect to share a second ago, but they were number 16 in the country in terms of rebound percentage. Utah was actually very good on the glass as well, number 30 in the country in terms of rebound percentage, and they do have some of those guys returning. Texas Tech was number 38 in the country in terms of rebound percentage, and Iowa State, typically under TJ Otzelberger, has struggled a little bit on the glass. They were able to ascend, become number 41 in the country in terms of rebound percentage, and then you did notice quite a bit of a drop-off from there, and then the teams that really did have their struggles within this conference, they were the teams that weren't really able to pull in there a lot of rebounds. Like with Kansas, they were uncharacteristically outside the top 50 to 54th in terms of rebound percentage. Yeah, Kansas State sitting there at 241st. That was just not great, to say the least. Even though Central Florida had some good shot blocking, they were just 247th in the country with regards to rebound percentage. And for Oklahoma State, they had a tough time being able to pop it from three outside the top 275 there, being 168th in terms of rebound percentage. That was just not going to cut it for them last season as well. And for Baylor, they were a team that they had a little bit of struggle on the glass. They were number 92 in the country in terms of their rebound percentage as well. And then if you're taking a look at the overall betting trends, it's now a very, very spread out conference, as you've got teams out there in the great state of Texas, West Virginia, so you've got a lot of travel that takes hold with regards to the Big 12. But for the Big 12, you did have a lot of teams have a little bit of struggle in terms of their against the spread record, mainly the Texas teams. Baylor 13-19-2 against the spread. TCU, they went 12-20 against the spread. Houston, even though they were able to make the national title game, they were still just 21-18-1 against the spread, so a little bit profitable, but not necessarily what you were looking for there. Kansas, they're obviously a brand name, so they got a little bit overvalued last year at 15-19 against the spread. Had a lot of teams that just hovered right around 500. Arizona State, West Virginia, Kansas State, Texas Tech, Central Florida, Colorado, all either one game above or one game below 500 against the spread. Your most profitable team was BYU, 22-14 against the spread. Iowa State was able to go 20-15 against the spread. Then Arizona, they were 20-17 against the spread, but you take a look at what these teams were able to do as true road teams last season, and I do find that to be very intriguing because home court advantage was really able to reign supreme with this conference. Arizona State really didn't have much of it. They went 4-10 against the spread at home. Cincinnati, 6-10-1 against the spread at home, and Central Florida, they were 8-10 against the spread at home, but then you had Kansas, Oklahoma State, 8-9 against the spread at home, a break-even 50-50 with West Virginia and Colorado, and then you had TCU, Iowa State, Houston, all go 9-8 against the spread at home, Baylor and Kansas State, 8-7 against the spread at home, but then BYU out there in Provo, Utah, 11-6 against the spread at home, Utah 12-7 against the spread at home, two teams out there in Utah, so big time travel there, Arizona 9-7 against the spread at home, Texas Tech, they were able to go 10-8 against the spread at home, and then these teams on the road, they had their hits and misses. So you had Baylor go 1-9-2 against the spread away from home. Utah went 2-8 against the spread at home after they were rock solid at home. TCU 3-8 against the spread on the road. Colorado 4-6 against the spread on the road. And then you did have some success stories. Texas Tech and Houston, they went 7-3 against the spread away from home. Arizona State, Iowa State 7-4 against the spread away from home. Kansas State 7-5 against the spread away from home. And then BYU, Arizona, West Virginia all able to go 6-5 and a 7-6 for Oklahoma State. And I think a big part of that was just the way that things were priced in as underdogs in this conference. You had quite a few teams be able to rise up and be plucky. Now, Colorado was not one of them, 10-13 against the spread as an underdog. TCU was 6-10 against the spread as a dog, and Utah was 5-11 there. But that's like Kansas State in the role of an underdog. They were 11-7 against the spread last season. Arizona State was able to go 13-11 against the spread as an underdog. Texas Tech was 4-2 as well. So very fascinating on that front. And then I mentioned it with the Big 12. You've got a wide range of styles. Some of these teams playing super duper up tempo. Some of these teams playing super duper low and slow. And you had one of the slowest teams in all of college basketball in this conference. West Virginia, 9 overs, 22 unders, and a push. If I'm not mistaken, that is a top 3 mark to the under in all of college basketball. It's only UMKC, Kansas City. They went 8 overs to 21 unders. That was the only team that had a higher under percentage than West Virginia last season. Certainly a team that was able to hunker down on defense and, well, on offense. It was not necessarily so great there. And then you would have quite a few other teams play over 60% of their games to the under. Houston, 23 unders, 15 overs, and 2 pushes. Kansas, 21 unders, 13 overs. Kansas State, 21 unders to 12 overs. TCU, 11 overs, 21 unders. Cincinnati, 12 overs, 23 unders. And then you had some teams outside of 60%, but still hitting a relatively good clip to the under. You had Utah go 18 unders to 15 overs. Iowa State, 20 unders to 15 overs. And then you would have some over teams. Texas Tech, they cranked things up a little bit more last season. 22 overs, 14 unders, and a push. BYU, 22 overs, 14 unders. Central Florida, 22 overs, 15 unders. Arizona, 21 overs, 16 unders. So you did have a few teams go a little bit more up-tempo there. And what I think is very interesting is when you take a look at things when it got into conference play and conference play only, that's where the unders really started to hit. You only had 4 teams play more overs than unders, as Oklahoma State, 11 overs to 10 unders, Arizona 14 overs to 10 unders, BYU 13 overs to 9 unders, and then Central Florida 14 overs to 9 unders, with having 4 teams hit at least 2/3 of their games to the under. You had TCU 14 unders to 7 overs, Utah 14 unders to 7 overs, and then 16 unders to 6 overs for both Kansas State and West Virginia, with quite a bit of teams that were still hitting at over 55% to the under, like Cincinnati, 13 unders to 10 overs, Houston and Baylor, 13 unders to 9 overs with a push thrown in there for Houston as well. And then you still had Arizona State go 11 unders to 10 overs. So very, very interesting to say the least what we've got here in the Big 12, a melting pot of a bunch of different teams, and a man that does a great job of covering it all over at the Locked On Big 12 podcast is Drake Toll, and he joins me on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Big XII Family Podcast with Big 12 Conference Preview Edition. And we're back here love you, Las Vegas, for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is a Big 12 Conference Preview Edition, so who better to have on than Drake Toll, he does such an amazing job with the Locked On Big 12 Podcast. He does a great job as your favorite party animal, play-by-play man as well. He's a broadcaster over there that's part of the Savannah Bananas, and he is their biggest denier, so we love that, and he's a Baylor alum as well, so it's always great to be able to get Drake aboard, who you're able to follow on the old Twitter/X at Drake C. Toll all together. And Drake, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Always fun, Greg. I'm excited to talk Big 12 basketball. I still believe this conference, despite those who poked holes in it last season, is number one in men's basketball across the country because of not just its depth, but how good the teams at the top are and how good they continue to get. So very excited to talk about some of the better programs in the conference and some of the programs I think could shock people this year.
Absolutely. And how about if we do start with one of the teams that a lot of people are picking towards the bottom, but I actually think that there's some upside here with Central Florida. They bring in a pair of transfers that have played together in Themis Fulks along with JaMychal Stillwell. They were both at UW-Milwaukee. Obviously, with Central Florida, they're going to have to replace Mustafa Team and company, but I do take a look at this bunch. I do see quite a bit of talent on the roster, and do I think that they're going to be knocking off Houston or anything like that? No, but for the Central Florida team, bringing in guys like Riley Kugel, and if they can have Devin Cambridge stay healthy, I think that there's upside.
Yeah, I think Riley Kugel is where I would start. Senior guard, who I thought was an incredible addition to this team coming from the SEC and Mississippi State. You mentioned Fulks, 6'1", 14.6 points per game last year, and effectively six assists per game at Milwaukee. Those are two guys you can help build a team around, two guards to help build a team around in a Big 12 that really has such great guard play. That's where you want to start when you're building a roster. And let's not forget, UCF was 7-13 last season in the Big 12. That's not a terrible record. They weren't 2-18. They weren't struggling to pick up wins week in and week out. They were 20-17 on the year as well. This is a program that still has the inklings and kind of the build of one that could compete in the Big 12 Conference and one that could possibly make a run to the NCAA tournament. Now, I don't currently have them in that conversation of the 10 to 12 teams in the Big 12 that should see themselves in March. I don't think UCF is in that category. At the same time, from Stillwell to Fulks to Kugel, don't count out the Knights.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I do think that there's upside there, and they could be pesky in this conference. Now, I take a look at this bunch, I think that it's going to be a little bit rough for Colorado. Love the fact that they're bringing Barrington Hargress, a 20-point-per-game scorer over at UC Riverside. The question is, what are they going to have around him? I always get this name incorrect, but Bengo Doc, he's going to be back after he at 6'11" was relatively rock solid for the team, but it feels like they're going to be relying upon a lot of freshmen. Like Andrew Crawford has some upside to him, but I really fear that in terms of the depth for Colorado, it's going to be lacking this season.
Yeah, 3-17 last year in Big 12 play, and Bengo Doc, like you mentioned, 6'8". He's a junior, so he's got good experience and comes back after 8 points and 4 rebounds per game last year. Elijah Malone, the fact that Colorado has a few guys in this rotation that returned from last season gives me confidence that continuity will help them. The addition of Barrington Hargress coming over from UC Riverside, that 20 points per game that you mentioned, is another plug-and-play guy who will start from day one for the Buffs. At the same time, if you're bringing back production, but that production did not produce, what are you really giving me? Colorado at 3-17 again in the Big 12 last year, bringing guys back, but they weren't effective last season. Their growth remains to be seen. I think Colorado's similar to UCF outside looking in, probably 15th or 16th to me in the Big 12 until proven otherwise.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I do think that for Colorado, it is going to be quite a bit rough there, but the fact that they do have a few guys returning is going to be able to help them out. And then I take a look at this team as one of intrigue because they always throw around a lot of money, but we have to question whether or not Jerome Tang's run in year number one at Kansas State was a flash in the pan, or perhaps it's a case where he might be able to recover as they bring in PJ Haggerty, nice score over at Memphis the last few seasons, along with Tulsa. They bring back CJ Jones as well, but I really fear that this team is going to be lacking something down low. They do have Tariq Smith, who's going to be able to give them a bit of something at 6'8", and Abdi Bashir was a nice scorer over at Monmouth, but this is a big step up for them as well. For Kansas State, I feel like the continuity might be a little bit better, but I really do have my question marks with Jerome Tang after the last few years.
Yeah, Abdi Bashir is where I'll start here. The addition at 6'7", he's a guard, and he had 20 points per game at Monmouth, but I think they're going to use him outside. So the question of size is still going to be an issue. PJ Haggerty, 6'3", 22 points per game last year at Memphis. He'll be great. But again, if you cannot dominate the post, and I mentioned it earlier, the Big 12 has so much good guard play that they're arguably the best guard league in the country, and they don't need to rely on the big man similar to how the Big East does. In a league where Kansas is still going to bang bodies in the paint with Flory Badunga, I asked that a Kansas State team try to put up with that, and I'm not sure if they can. They were below 500 on the year, 16-17, 9-11 in Big 12 play. There were spurts toward January or February where you thought that Kansas State might put it together and make a late run in the Big 12 tournament or a late run at March, and they just didn't. I think Jerome Tang is, and I like Jerome Tang a lot. He's a guy that I've gotten to know personally, but right now the way I would describe it is he's kind of drowning. We're going to have to figure out whether or not he stays afloat this season in the Big 12. If he doesn't, I do believe the Kansas State administration, because that's been a tumultuous relationship, I think they'll be ready to make a change.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that this is a massive season for Jerome Tang over at Kansas State, as it's also massive that we've got Drake Toll, the Locked On Big 12 podcast, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And how about if we dive in on a team that has a new coach once again this year? That'd be West Virginia. Feels like we've been saying that a lot the last few years, but I do think that Russ Hodge is a very nice add. Obviously, with West Virginia, they're not going to be a Blazer, much like they weren't last year. But I like the fact that Brennan Laurent, along with Jasper Floyd, follow Hodge on over from North Texas. They bring in a good scorer in Trayson Eaglestaff, Chase Moore, Hunter Huff. I think that these guys are solid in the backcourt. They're not going to have necessarily the world's most ideal size, though Harlan Obioa, if he's able to come in and be rock solid, that would be nice for them as well. I look at West Virginia as a team of balance. Maybe they're not going to be able to compete at the top, but this is going to be a team that I think nobody wants to play with, a very slow, distinct style.
Yeah, Ren Baker, the athletic director at West Virginia, wanted to go the Texas Tech route. Let's go find the last coach at North Texas and make him the head coach at our Big 12 school. Grant McCasland, obviously having a lot of success for the Red Raiders. Can you get the same from a guy like Ross Hodge? The good news is at North Texas, his first season he was 19-15. His second year, 27-9. So he showed a lot of growth and improvement, even with his own guys. Didn't make the NCAA tournament, but has been on staffs that have, and he was on the staff at North Texas when Grant McCasland built it. So it'll be a very similar formula. I think we're a year away from West Virginia. I think Trayson Eaglestaff, like you mentioned, is a very good addition to this team. Hunter Uff is going to be great. Chance Moore should be solid. I'm looking at a West Virginia team that will sneak up on a few Big 12 schools, but I don't see them winning more than 7 or 8 games in conference play.
Yep, I do think that they're going to be facing an uphill battle in conference play, and I think that it could be a case where, because of their style of play, they stay very close in a lot of games, but maybe they don't necessarily pull them out. And then when I take a look at this school, it's going to be interesting to see what we get, because Arizona State brings in quite a few guys that had success at the mid-major level. Marcus Adams was very solid over at CSUN. Mo Odom was actually one of the top leaders in assists last season when he was over at Pepperdine. That said, Jake O'Neal, even though he had 9+ rebounds per game over at Idaho State, at 6'4", he doesn't necessarily have ideal size for this conference. And with Arizona State under Bobby Hurley, I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like the guard play has gotten worse and worse with every progressing year. And the pieces around Mo Odom, I really have question marks with.
I don't think it's just you here, Greg. Arizona State's got a lot of question marks, and it starts with the head coach. 4-16 in the Big 12, 13-20 overall last season. Mo Odom is a great pickup, 7.5 assists per game. You mentioned those numbers. Adante Holloman is going to be good out of Georgia Southern. Marcus Adams, I think, could be a stalwart for Arizona State, but is he a stalwart in the Big 12? Is Mo Odom a stalwart in the Big 12? When you compare this roster to that of Houston, when you compare this roster to that of BYU and what they have coming in this season, or Texas Tech, I don't see it. And I think they're still hovering that 15 or 16 range in the conference. I don't see anything right now, sadly, for Arizona State and Bobby Hurley, who somehow still has a job, that gives me confidence they can win in the Big 12 conference. I'm not very high on the Sun Devils.
Yeah, I'm not too high on them either. And when it comes to Oklahoma State, I think that they're going to be an interesting case as well, because for Oklahoma State, they do bring in a pair of guys from the SEC, Kanye Clary, along with Victorious Miller. And Miller was rock solid over at LSU last year. And if Anthony Roy could be healthy and did what he did over at UW Green Bay, which I doubt, considering he was averaging about 25 points per game, that would be nice for them as well. Interesting collection here. I see some upside here, but at the same time, I do think that this team might struggle a little bit on the post with having Parsifla and Leftarius, I'm going to say this last name incorrect, Menterzauskas, having a lot quite a bit down low.
Yeah. So Isaiah Coleman is where I start with Oklahoma State. I think that he could be a catalyst for them. 6'5", junior guard, who, what if he comes out as your Taman Lipsey type and has the ability as a playmaker to drive your team and pick up 3 or 4 more wins than you probably should have. From there, Anthony Roy, 26 points per game at Green Bay, but only in 11 games. Christian Coleman, can he replicate 12 points per game, 7 rebounds per game in the Big 12? I don't know. And Kanye Clary, can he walk in and have a good season after an injury last year? Question marks again, but at the same time, I think I'm starting to see it for Oklahoma State. I think the way they built this roster, and with rebound numbers that are solid, I think the way they built this roster, they'll have an opportunity to compete in the Big 12 this season at a better rate than maybe Utah or Colorado or UCF. So I got Oklahoma State in that kind of 11-12 range. Expect to see them in the NIT for sure.
Yep, I'm sort of with you there. I do think that for Oklahoma State, probably going to be towards the lower half of the conference, but I certainly see some upside and some guys that could produce right away. And this was a team that towards the beginning part of the offseason I was feeling good about. Not so much anymore with Cincinnati. Having to kick Jizzle James out the team is not great. They're still going to have good low post play, as Wes Miller's team seemingly always do, with bringing in Asaf Thiem, who was rock solid over at Central Florida last year. And Day Thomas is a nice three-point shooter, but now they have to rely upon Kirk Kriisa coming off of injury, doing a lot for this team. Other than him, you don't have a lot of ball handling there. And for Cincinnati, I felt like this was the year that they were going to break through, but now with Jizzle James off the team, lots more question marks.
Yeah, Thiem is 7'2". He's going to be one of the more powerful centers in the Big 12 this year. Miller, 6'11". He'll play a lot of forward spot this year. Both of those sizes stick out for me, but you're exactly right. With Jizzle James being gone. Now here's the flip side of that, and I think if you asked Wes Miller, it's what he'd tell you, is you're getting rid of a very good talent, but probably a locker room guy who wasn't so solid in that category, right? So what you're missing in athleticism, you're probably going to make up for in being able to bring cohesion to your locker room. Sometimes that can play well and play to your advantage. If Kirk Kriisa is as good as his potential has been spoken into existence as, that's kind of clunky, but again, I want to reiterate here, if he's as good as the potential we've been promised, pre-injury especially, I think you can rely on him as one of the better guards in possibly the Big 12, a top 10, top 15 guard in a guard-heavy conference. And from there, you've got 7'2", 6'11". What if Cincinnati is able to sneak into the NCAA tournament as an 8-12, 9-11 Big 12 team?
Yep, I could certainly see that as well, and I don't think that Cincinnati is going to completely bottom out. The James news certainly does hurt them, but they still have rock solid play down low, and for Wes Miller, it might be do or die for him to make the NCAA tournament, as well as Drake Tola does great work with the Locked On Big 12 podcast, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I know you know quite a bit about these guys. It's the Baylor Bears, your alma mater, and quite a few transfers. They do lose some guys, ironically enough, Robert Wright within the conference, but they bring in Obi Ejim, who was very rock solid over at Wyoming last year. Michael Rata, he had 6'9", as good versatility. You've got Tunde Yesufu, who's coming in as one of the better freshmen in all of college basketball. And I take a look at Baylor, and I do think that this is going to be a team that's going to be sharp from the outside. And bigger than that, I see a team that's going to be improved on defense from past years as well.
Greg, I don't know. You're being really kind to Baylor. They lost everybody, genuinely everybody off of last year's roster. So Yesufu coming in as a top 15 prospect in the country is good. And Rataj, you're going to rely on him, hopefully to bring the same pop that he brought last season, 17 points and 7 rebounds per game. Yeah, the defense is there, but you know, Scott Drew really hasn't had the elite defenses we expected of him since that national championship year and since losing Jerome Tang. After that, Baylor has relied on savvy young guards who were really good at playmaking and scoring, and a lot of these one-and-done guys like a Keontae George or a VJ Edgecombe who have come through the program in the last couple of years, but even going back to Kendall Brown, who weren't elite on defense, but they were facilitators, they were scorers, they were playmakers. Baylor this year has to go back to the drawing board altogether and figure everything out from effectively jump. Now, Scott Drew is the guy that I trust to do that, but man, in past years, Greg, I've said about the Baylor Bears is they've integrated 2 or 3 new starters per year, that they're going to need the first 10, 12, 13 games of the year to have everything click. They're going to need the first 20 games of 20, 25, 26 to really settle into who this team is, because once you get into Big 12 play, the lights get even brighter, the competition's even tougher, and from there, I don't have a lot of confidence that Baylor is. I mean, they were 20-15 last year, 10-10 in conference play. I see them as finishing somewhere in that same market. Now, the Big 12, I should have mentioned earlier, goes to an 18-game conference schedule next season. Baylor is in that category of maybe only winning 9 conference games, 8 conference games, and sneaking into the NCAA tournament because they have such a good brand.
Yep, and with Baylor, it is going to be really interesting to see how all those transfers work together. Scott Drew knows what he's doing as a coach, but certainly losing a versatile guy like VJ Edgecombe, that's going to be hurting them for this upcoming season. And this, I think, is very interesting. Utah going with Alex Jensen as their new head coach. He's had quite a bit of experience at the NBA level, and he retained a few guys from last season. Keanu Dawes is going to be back from a season ago. They bring in some interesting transfers. Babacar Faye, Don McHenry, if I'm not mistaken, they were teammates over at Western Kentucky last season. Interesting team to say the least. James Okonkwo is going to be coming over as well. When I look at this team, I see a lot of solid role players. I don't see that guy that is really the one that you trust in late in games though.
No, and Keanu Dawes being the return man, 6'9" forward, 8 points, 6 rebounds per game. Is he the one that you want the ball in his hands to win the game? I don't think so. Does Terrence Brown become that guy, or Don McHenry? Okonkwo could be at the forward position a really good complement to Dawes. Does that give me confidence that Utah, like you said, has the guy, has the player who can, at the very end of the game just ruin your season and make you sad? I don't see it, not yet. Now, you've already mentioned first-year head coach with a ton of NBA experience. It's kind of the BYU model the Cougars use. I think that BYU and Kevin Young, they got a much better head coach in position in Provo right now than what we're seeing in Salt Lake City. But Utah is still, in my opinion, in a better spot than maybe an Arizona State, in a better spot possibly than Colorado or West Virginia even. I see the Utes finishing in that 11, 12, 13 range in the Big 12, maybe sneaking into the NIT.
Yep, and with Utah, I do think that there is a little bit of upside with them as well. But again, who's going to be able to close out those late games? I think is going to be a big question mark. And when it comes to this team, I have a little bit of question mark who that main guy is going to be. Though Jaden Pierre for TCU might turn out to be that guy. They've got a lot of experience on this roster with bringing in CJ Walker, who feels like has been playing college basketball for 500 years. They went West Coast with bringing in Lutarius Levicius, who is a nice three-point shooter over at Oregon State. And then they've got some punch. David Punch down low. Want to get your thoughts on TCU, because certainly offensively, they bring in a little bit with Levicius coming over from Oregon State, but I feel like if this team is going to be able to get it done, they're going to need to do so with tough, tenacious defense. But as we know, that's been a hallmark of Jamie Dixon over at TCU.
Yeah, I still really like Jamie Dixon. He's the best coach in TCU basketball history, and that's a pretty bleak history. So it's partially why he has that moniker. But he understands the program. He's a TCU guy through and through, and obviously he proved himself at Pitt, and now at TCU he's made a couple runs to the NCAA tournament. I think David Punch could be, Jaden Pierre could be a couple of experienced guards that, or I should say Pierre being an experienced guard, could walk into this conference and shock a lot of people. Punch, still a younger guy, but 6'7", really long, could grow into being a solid Big 12 player and grow up. We watch him grow up in this league. Brock Harding as well. I'm not completely selling on TCU because I still trust Jamie Dixon. And I know there'll be people who push back on that and say, well, yeah, Dixon was 16-16 last year, 9-11 in Big 12 play. Is that really going to get it done? And this is just a brutal, brutal league. I think if Dixon was coaching the ACC still, if he was still at Pitt, he'd probably have, especially the tenacious defense that he builds, he'd probably have a lot more success. But the Big 12, you get slapped around every night. I'm sure that Dixon has built, especially with this revamped backcourt, a TCU team that can at least contend.
Yep, with TCU, I do think that they're going to be able to contend. I think that they're going to be able to play some solid defense. Still have a little bit of question mark with regards to some of that backcourt, but certainly Jamie Dixon, he knows what he's doing as a rock-solid coach over there. And then if you want to talk about rock-solid coaches, TJ Otzelberger, he always has, I would say, playing some solid defense. And no doubt about it, losing some of the likes of Keshawn Gilbert and company in the backcourt is big, but they bring in a guy in Taymon Lipsby who does a great job in terms of being a defensive stalwart, in terms of being able to dole out the ball. And they do return a lot from last year. Milan Mimosilovic, so versatile with his three-point shooting. Joshua Jefferson, he's able to generate turnovers. He's able to grab boards. Nate Heisey played a nice role for this team last year. Want to get your thoughts on Iowa State, because the depth seems like it's maybe a little bit less than it was a season ago, but I like the pickup of Dominic Nelson, and we know with Iowa State, they're going to be one of the best teams in the country at generating turnovers.
Yeah, I love TJ Otzelberger. I love Iowa State. I'm still waiting for their first Final Four run. I'm still waiting for a true, good, deep run in March Madness for this team. And I think this could be the year for Otzelberger. They'll be a top 5 team, in my opinion, in the Big 12 because of the return of Jefferson, return of Momcilovic, the return of Taymon Lipsy. If Lipsy stays healthy, especially, this is a very dangerous team. The addition of Dominic Nelson or Blake Buchanan coming in for the team this year, those will be guys that, like you mentioned, don't give you a ton of depth necessarily because they're going to get a whole lot of minutes. And if you don't have a ton of depth in your Iowa State, it stands the question for me of how do you play such intense defense for 35 games the way that TJ Otzelberger does and keep fresh legs. I'm not sure if Iowa State can do that. I think it's why they've had struggles in the last couple of NCAA tournaments. They've had struggles getting completely deep in NCAA tournaments since Otzelberger got there. If they find depth pieces toward the end of the year as the season goes on, expecting to make a run, they are certainly a lock for the NCAA tournament, though, and should be a top 4 or 5 seed.
Yep, and I think that is what is exactly what the question mark is for Iowa State. Depth. Are they going to be able to stay fresh towards the back half of the season because they certainly have the front-end talent? Are they able to find some guys to just be able to give those guys a little bit of a blow here and there? I think that that's going to be big, as Drake Tolo does great work with the Locked On Big 12 podcast, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And then this team doesn't have quite the splash that they do from a season ago, but I think it might work out a little bit better. Gone are the days of the likes of Hunter Dickinson and company for Kansas, but they bring in guys that obviously were successful at the mid-major ranks, and Jaden Dawson, along with Melvin Council, Marco Jackson, and Floria Baduga, they're going to be back, and Darren Peterson, great name, he's one of the best freshmen in all of college basketball. Want to get your thoughts here on Kansas, because they don't have quite the sizzle that they have from past seasons, but I think there might be a little bit more stake, and I think that there might be a little bit more buy-in as just a collective team.
So 24/7 has Darren Peterson ranked higher than AJ DeBanza, and so 6'5" freshman is going to walk in and be an instant impact guy, playing with Flory Badunga, who's in his second season with Kansas, Melvin Council coming in, Trey White being a part of the show this year. There's a potential that the number 1 draft pick in the NBA draft in 2026 is Darren Peterson. He may be in a Kansas Jayhawks jersey this year, and so the way that Kansas builds its championship rosters are with older guys, senior guys. They want to find a player who's going to be there for 3 or 4 years. That's not what you're going to get out of Peterson, and this is kind of old dog, new trick. We have seen certainly great young talent and one-and-done guys like a Grady Dick at Kansas, but at the same time, I mean, number 1 in the country, possible first overall draft pick in the first round of the NBA draft. This is big for a guy in Bill Self who likes to build a team of 4 or 5 guys that are 22, 23 years old in the starting lineup. Not this year. You're going to see Badunga, a sophomore, leading the team, and a freshman in Peterson leading the team, and maybe it works. This Kansas team is, again, similar to Iowa State, 3rd, 4th, 5th in the Big 12 for me right now, and a lock to be a 3 or 4 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Yep, absolutely. With Kansas, I do think that they're going to be solid, and I think that this collective might just play better with one another than they did a season ago. And this is a unit that I think is going to be so interesting because Henry Vassar was really a big part of Arizona last year. He's gone, but so many people thought that Montejuvis Krivas was really going to be that guy for Arizona last year. He gets hurt after like 8 or so games. He's back this year along Toby Awaka down low. For Arizona, no longer they have Caleb Love, who could very easily shoot you into a game, and boy, could he shoot you out of a game, but They do bring back Jaden Bradley. They bring in more versatile pieces, and the likes of Braden Burris and company, a lot of good freshmen coming in as well. Want to get your thoughts here on Arizona because they very much did invest a lot in freshmen. They're going to need them to play some very significant minutes, but having that veteran experience down low, I think is really going to help them out.
I really like the youth of this Arizona team from Koa Pete, who is the number 11 overall player in the country, 6'8" forward. You mentioned Braden Burris, 6'4" freshman guard. Both of those guys coming in with Awaka or Krivas could anchor this team with Jaden Bradley to be maybe, it's hard to say best starting 5, but gosh, because I do believe that there are even better starting 5s in the Big 12, but that's how good this conference is. I can label you for Arizona 5, 6, 7 guys that in the post-Caleb Love era of Arizona basketball, 5, 6, 7 guys that are going to be so good, stalwarts for this team. I'm very excited to see how this roster plays together. If it clicks, watch out. Arizona has the power to win the Big 12 conference.
Yeah, with Arizona, certainly the talent is there. I love what they've got down low. Obviously, the freshmen are going to need to find their way, but certainly this team has a freshman that I think is going to find his way right away. We mentioned AJ DeBanza and where he's ranked in terms of the overall freshman, him versus Darren Peterson, and obviously he's going to be big at BYU, but don't sleep on Xavier Stanton either. The true 7-footer that's going to be coming in. They bring back Kebakita, they bring back Dawson Baker, Richie Saunders. This team was so efficient on offense last year. Obviously, losing a guy like Dallin Hall is big, but you bring in Robert Wright to be able to replace him. And for BYU, I think that this team is going to be firing all cylinders on offense once again.
It's weird. Let's start there with Dallin Hall. This is a 14-6 team in conference play last year. Dallin Hall, losing him is kind of a tell that just BYU is that good now. That even the likes of Dallin Hall, who's pretty solid, looked around and said, ooh, I don't know how much I can contribute to a team led by Kiba Cato, Richie Saunders, Rob Wright, who comes in from Baylor, AJ DeBansa, one of the best players in the country, arguably number one in this incoming class, in my opinion, still probably number one. And if we talk Peterson as the number one overall NBA draft pick, you also have to talk DeBansa. BYU might have the best player in all of college basketball on its roster this year, alongside a senior guard in Richie Saunders, 6'5", 16.5 points per game last season, who plays a hard-nosed brand of basketball. This is, again, Kiba Cato, what he gave you mostly off the bench last year for BYU, Rob Wright from Baylor, AJ DeBansa. I look at BYU as maybe the second best team in the Big 12, a top 5 team in the country, and if they're not in the Final Four, that's going to be disappointing for NBA legend Kevin Young, who believes this team has the potential to get there, and I think they might just.
And I think that this team has a lot of potential to be able to make a Final Four run as well, because they very nearly made it to the Final Four last year as well. That'd be Texas Tech. You bring back a guy in JT Toppin, who for my money is a top 5 player in all of college basketball. You're bringing Lawan Watts, who at 6'6" has so much versatility. I recognize that they were at a lower level, but Tyree Bryant, Donovan Atwell, these are rock solid scorers, especially Atwell coming over from UNC Greensboro. I have upside for Josiah Mosley. Christian Anderson was really good in that backcourt as well. A little bit of question mark in terms of who might be that overall main floor general with Elijah Hawkins out of the fold, but for Texas Tech, they've got, in my opinion, one of the better coaches in all of college basketball in Grant McCasland, and when you got a guy like a JT Toppin, that's a good deodorant for any sort of sink you might have.
Yeah, and not just JT Toppin, but, returning JT Toppin, right? He's seen the system. He's seen Grant McCasland, and now the junior, 18 points per game, 9 rebounds per game. Who knows if he's got even more in the clip to hang out with Texas Tech come next season as well. Christian Anderson is going to be a great compliment. Lawan Watts, as you mentioned earlier as well, is going to be a great addition. Donovan Atwell. Interested to see how the mid-major guys get into the fold, head into this Grant McCasland offense and more specifically defense, but I have no reservations. I am as excited to watch Texas Tech as I am Arizona for very similar reasons, and it's how these new guys complement each other and come together. I'm excited to watch the continuity of BYU and the young guys at BYU. I'm excited to see how a Saunders or a Cato are able to lead this team. I'm further excited to see how Texas Tech integrates depth, integrates new starters out of the transfer portal, and still wins at the highest level as those guys follow JT Toppin. I love the Big 12 Conference in general, but as I looked at like Jaden Bradley, okay, and then I go into Richie Saunders, and then I go to JT Toppin and say, okay, they're all back to their teams, and now they've added elite freshmen or elite guys out of the transfer portal, and we still haven't even gotten to the number one team in the Big 12. That just shows me that we could be talking about Texas Tech, BYU, and Arizona as all 2 or 3 seeds in the NCAA tournament, and I don't think that would shock anybody.
No, it would not, and it would not shock me if when it's all said and done, this is the number 1 overall seed in that NCAA tournament in Houston. You bring back Milo Zuzan, that is absolutely massive. It looked like they were going to be going with Pop Isaacs, which that had me a little bit concerned. I didn't think that he was necessarily the world's greatest fit, but now they don't need to worry about that. They bring in some rock-solid freshmen. Isaiah Harwell, Chris Senek down low is going to be rock-solid. I recognize that you do lose some of those pieces from a season ago, but Joseph Tugler is just such a good shot blocker. I think that Mercy Miller is actually going to be able to take a little bit of a stride forward as well. You bring back Emmanuel Sharp too. You got a nice blend of guys that are seniors, guys that are really good upside freshmen, and having a guy like an Uzan, he, in my opinion, is one of the best point guards in all of college basketball.
Yeah, this is the team that lost the national championship, and they're even better this year. This is the number 2 team in college basketball last season, and I think if they play Florida 10 times, they probably win 5 of them in 2025. Now coming into 25-26, they have 3 starters returning, including the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. I don't think they're going to skip a beat. Emmanuel Sharp, so good. Milo Zuzan, so good. And then Joseph Tugler, like you mentioned, his ability to block shots at 6'7", almost reminds me of that kind of Mark Vidal type at Baylor a couple of years ago, where you're like, 6'7"? That's where and then you just bang into the paint. And so I think we're going to see, especially Isaiah Harwell coming in, Sinak coming in, those 2 guys, top 15 in the country out of this freshman class. This is the best Houston recruiting class in history, and you've got 3 guys back who are experienced. They are my number 1 team in the country preseason because of the names that are returning from a national championship runner-up team. They're the number 1 team in the Big 12. And again, we should see Houston, Texas Tech, BYU, Arizona, each of those schools in a 1, 2, or 3 seed when it comes into March Madness next year. Barring injury, this conference at the very top is going to be electric. See, I mean, think about this. We're going to be able to see Emmanuel Sharp, Milo Suzanne take on JT Toppin and Christian Anderson, or Richie Saunders and AJ DeBansa, or for Arizona, Jaden Bradley and Koa Pete, or for Kansas, Flory Badunga mixed with Darren Peterson. It's going to be a wild year in the Big 12 Conference. Those 5 teams, anytime they're playing each other in any matchup and in any arena, it should be sold out and a just must-see ticket.
Oh, this is going to be cinema in the Big 12 this year. This is going to be an absolutely amazing conference. And Drake, you're going to have a front row seat to it all. You do a great job with the Locked On Big 12 podcast. Additionally, you're doing a great job with the Party Animals. I know that your postseason in terms of baseball is getting started as well as that of Major League Baseball. So love to get people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, on True TV this weekend, the Party Animals are in the Banana Ball Tour Championship playoffs. You'll get to hear me there. And then every day on Locked On Big 12 at LO Big 12 on Twitter or wherever you find your podcasts with Locked On Big 12 and on YouTube. Greg, it's always fun.
Always great to be able to have Drake aboard. He does such an amazing job taking a look at the Big 12 every single time he joins me. Won such amazing insights and did so once again today. So big thanks to Drake for joining me on Cusco Seeps, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming next, it is that time of the podcast to give you my projector or finish for the Big 12. Here in lovely Las Vegas for Cusco Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be joined by Drake Toll today. He does a tremendous job over at the Locked On Big 12 podcast. He also is the voice of the Party Animals for those that love baseball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. He did so once again today. So big thanks to Drake for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector or finish for the Big 12, as per usual, with a conference preview like today's. I leave it just as its own entity. If I miss any news and notes in college basketball from Wednesday, those will be polished up on the podcast tomorrow. I want to give these as much sparkle and shine as humanly possible. So if you're looking at this, whether that be a few days before the start of the season or very, very early October, you're able to get all set there. But how about if we run through my projector or finish, and at number 16, I have to go with Colorado. I do think that Tad Boyle is a solid coach, but they just didn't bring in too much in the transfer portal. Barrington Hargress, I think, is rock solid. Barrington Hargress, he comes over from UC Riverside, 20 points, 4 assists per contest. He is certainly going to be able to elevate the guard play that they had a season ago. And Bengu Dak, hopefully I said that correct, he's back after Dak down low at 6'9". He was able to give the team right around about 8 points per contest, but what else do you really have on this team? Andrew Crawford is a 6'6" combo guy that comes in as a freshman. I think that he's got a little bit of upside, but there's just such little Division I experience. Sebastian Rencic, who was coming off the bench for this team last season, he's going to need to step up in a very big way for them. I've got so much question marks, like perhaps Josiah Sanders turns out to be something in the backcourt, but I mean, you got Barrington Hargress, who was rock solid in the Big West. This is a big step up in competition, and you're really just don't have much else. Big time question marks here with Colorado. It just feels like the game has passed by Tad Boyle and they're not utilizing NIL the way that they need to. So number 16 in my projector or finish, I'm going with Colorado. At number 15, I do go with Arizona State. For Arizona State, they bring in some nice guys that were rock solid at the mid-major level. Like Jake O'Neal last year was able to put up some really good numbers in the Big Sky over at Idaho State. I mean, he was averaging darn near a double-double, but now he's a guy that is 6'4", that was pulling in rebounds in the Big Sky. Now he has to go up against Big 12 competition. I've got some question marks there. Now, Marcus Adams, he's a former top 75 recruit, was over at Kansas, was over at BYU, could never get out there on the floor. Last year really flourished over with the Cal State Northridge Matadors, and he was able to put up 16 points per contest. I actually think that he suits his style very well, but when you're trusting in Mo Odom to run the show for this offense, like, man, that's not a great place to be, and it just feels like year after year for Arizona State, the guard play has gotten worse and worse in the Hurley era. Like with Mo Odom, he was a solid distributor with 7.5 assists per contest when he was over there in the WCC last season, but I mean, he did have quite a few turnovers. Pepperdine really didn't didn't flourish last season as well. So I've got some question marks there as a solid 3-point shooter, but you've got a lot of guys that are just not used to this level, and you've got a lot of guys that just departed after last season as well. We saw them try to mix and match with a bunch of mid-major guys last season, and it didn't necessarily turn out the best. No reason to think that it will this year. So Arizona State, number 15 in terms of my projector finish. At number 14, I do go with Utah. Utah went with a very interesting hire in Alex Jensen, and I do think that Alex Jensen has a little bit of upside to him. He comes in after he was spending a little bit of time at the NBA level, so that's a lot of fun, and I know that he had a little bit of an NBA career as well, someone that used to be over at Utah, so he's got a lot of good familiarity there, but I do have some question marks with regards to this roster. He did retain a few guys from last year, and I do like that. Keanu Dawes is going to be back, and Don McHenry can be a little bit of a versatile guy. Who's going to be able to help him out in the backcourt, though? You're going to need Ja'Kai Howard, someone like that, to be able to help out Sadu Traore, who spent some time over at Iowa, spent some time over at Manhattan. He's got a little bit of game to him as well. McHenry was a 17-point per game scorer over at Western Kentucky last year. He wasn't necessarily much of a facilitator, though. Who's going to facilitate for this team? Is it going to be Terrence Brown? Or are you going to be able to get a little bit more out of Elijah Moore, who's an upside guy that comes in from Syracuse, but could never really find his footing over at Syracuse? They've got some nice pieces. I just don't know if they've got a good cohesive unit. Bob Carfei should be able to give you a bit of something down low as well, but serious question marks with a coaching change over there at Utah. I've got them at number 14 in terms of my projector finish. At number 13, I do go with Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State does lose a turn from a season ago. Now, they look to the SEC to be able to bring some talent as Kanye Clary. We remember what he was able to do over at Penn State a few seasons ago. He was rock solid out there in the great state of Mississippi last year. And Victorious Miller, I liked what he did over at LSU last year. A former top 100 recruit. He was able to put in their 9 points per contest. Not an amazing 3-point shooter, but he can play both sides of the floor. That's something that I think is going to be relatively solid. And then you've got the Colemans, Christian Coleman and Isaiah Coleman. For Christian Coleman, he was over at UAB last year, was a relatively rock solid forward / big man for them. And then you've got Isaiah Coleman. Coleman, he had 6'5" over at Seton Hall last year, was really the lone guy that gave them production. 15.5 points per contest, but not really a great 3-point shooter, and that's really what this team is lacking. And you're going to need to get Anthony Roy to really be on his game. He was over at UW Green Bay last season, and when Roy was actually out there on the floor, he was one of the top scorers in all of college basketball, shooting 43% from 3, 25.5 points per contest. That entire Green Bay system ran through him, and whenever he was out there on the floor, UW Green Bay played zero defense whatsoever. There were some things with he and Doug Gottlieb. I think that that's Doug Gottlieb just not being a great coach. I don't necessarily think that that's on Anthony Roy, but do keep in mind he was on that New Mexico State team that they had the scandal a few years ago as well, so you do have to have some character questions with them for Oklahoma State. I do think that other than Roy, they're just lacking a lot of shooting in a conference where you're going to need to knock down some shots. Oklahoma State was well outside the top 200 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Parsons Falah should be able to give you a bit of something down low, and I do think that this team is going to be rock solid in the post, but again, that guard play, I've got massive question marks there with Clary probably going to need to be running the show. So at number 13 in my projector finish, do go with Oklahoma State. At number 12, I go with Central Florida. I know that a lot of people are picking them low, and it's not like I'm picking them massively high, but JaMychal Stillwell was a double-double machine over at UW Milwaukee last season. He's only 6'8", but that dude has some strength. And then you've got Devin Cambridge, who has played so much college basketball that it's not even funny. Was limited to just 6 games last season at Texas Tech. 2 seasons ago, he was limited to 8 games. But last we saw him when he was over at Arizona State, was able to be versatile with about 10 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. Has never really been like an amazing 3-point shooter, but he's able to space the floor at 6'6". A clean bill of health is big for him. And Riley Kugel, I still go back a few years ago when in the last 10 or 12 games of the season at Florida, he was averaging double figures. This guy can be rock solid. Last year, he was an okay player over at Mississippi State. 9.5 points for a team that was able to make the NCAA tournament, what have you, over at Mississippi State last year. So I do think that this is going to be a bunch that is going to be relatively solid. I do think that with regards to the pieces all fitting together, that's a big question mark. But Themis, folks, he played with Stillwell last season over at UW Milwaukee. He's been a 4+ assists per game guy at 2 different stops. I think that he's going to be able to do a solid job here. And then John Bull, he had 7'2", comes on over after he spent a little bit of time out there in the SEC as well. I think that he's going to be a nice little post piece. I think that Central Florida honestly has some relatively solid guys that can get this team, I think, towards the bubble. I don't know if they make the NCAA tournament, but I think that this team is being a little bit overlooked. I've got them at number 12 in my projector finish. At number 11, I go with Kansas State. Kansas State has much more talent than what you'd find for team number 11 in my projector finish, but Jerome Tang, he had that magical year number 1 where you were able to have Marquise Noel and all those guys really shine through, but it's turned out to be a flash in the pan. Now, I do like the fact that they bring in a little bit less splash. Obviously, you bring in PJ Haggerty, a 20-point-per-game score over at Tulsa along with Memphis, but the rest of these other guys, they were nice mid-major players, like an Abdi Bashir was a 20-point-per-game score over at Monmouth. Nate Johnson was a solid player with about 13 points per game, doled out some dimes when he was over at Akron last season. You got CJ Jones, who returns from a season ago after he was a rock-solid scorer with about 8 or so points per contest. You just don't have as much down low. You're going to be relying upon Tariq Smith to really hold it down there, and we have seen these big men at Kansas State like Ogana Yesu is a guy that they took a shot on last year. It really didn't pan out. It's been a little bit of, shall we say, a horse apiece sort of situation there. I do like the guard play of this team. I think that the front court is really leaving something to be desired, and I think that Jerome Tang just in general might not be a very good coach. I feel like he got overrated after that Elite Eight run, and I do feel like with Kansas State, they put all their eggs in the basket of PJ Haggerty and don't have as much down low to be able to really be competitive in this conference. So with Kansas State, I do have them at number 11 in my projector finish. At number 10, I go with Cincinnati. With Cincinnati, they probably would be in the upper half of the conference if it wasn't for the fact that Jizzle James got suspended and he is now removed from the program. That's not great because he was supposed to be one of their main guards, a guy in which you ran offense through. Now you're going to be looking to a lot more Day Thomas and Kirk Risa. With Kirk Risa, for one, he's just dealt with a lot of injuries in general. You just don't know if he's going to be healthy for this season. Was limited to 9 games over at Kentucky last year, and he was a nice facilitator over at Kentucky, being able to dole out about 4 assists per game, but it's not like Cincinnati has amazing three-point shooting. Now, Day Thomas was a 40% three-point shooter last year. He was able to give the team in that neighborhood about 10 or so points per contest, so he's going to be your main guy that you're going to be looking to feed the ball to. But that said, who else is going to be able to step up? Jalen Celestine, he has spent some time over at Cal, he spent some time over at Baylor, 6'7" guy that's able to space the floor, and I do like what this team has down low. Jalen Haynes might not have the world's greatest size at 6'8", but he's able to pull on some boards. Baba Miller showed some nice versatility over at Florida Atlantic last season, a former top 75 recruit who began his career over at Florida State. And Mustafa Thiem at 7'2", he was able to give Central Florida right around about 2 blocks per contest last season, but was not necessarily the world's greatest defender. He would sell out a little bit too much for blocks, and with Cincinnati just taking that big loss of Jizzle James no longer being with the program really downgraded me on them. So with Cincinnati, I think that might be another rough year for Wes Miller, and this could be a hot seat year for him. I've got Cincinnati at number 10 in my projector finish. So yes, I am on to Cincinnati. At number 9, I'm on to West Virginia. With West Virginia, I felt like Russ Hodge was a really good pickup coming on over from North Texas, and he brings with him a few guys like a Brennan Lawrenton, along with Jasper Floyd, a pair of guys that really just know the system. And I really like Jasper Floyd as a player. I still remember when he was over at Fairfield 2 seasons ago, was a do-it-all guy, was the exact same over at North Texas last year. Not a dominant scorer, but he shot about 43.5% from 3, 9 points, 4 assists. He'll give you a few boards. He'll give you a little bit over a steal per contest. We can bank on this team playing relatively slow and control. And for Hunter Huff, he had a little bit of a tough 3-point shooting start to the season when he was over at Chattanooga last year, but he still finished up the year shooting 41.5% from 3, put in there 15 points per contest. It's not like Chattanooga was necessarily just playing with their hair on fire. Chance Moore, he's used to playing in a very slow and controlled system over at St. Bonaventure last season. Not an amazing 3-point shooter, but he once again could play some solid defense, give you 6.5 boards, 13 points per game. Not necessarily a guy that's going to be like a main facilitator at 6'5", but I think that he does a great job of fitting in with this system. And then you're bringing Trayson Eaglestaff. He was an 18-plus point per game scorer over in North Dakota. You're going to need him to give you a little bit more defense, but that's the sort of scoring that you need in this conference. And then the 7-footer in Harlan Obia, he comes on over after he was a very rock-solid player over at Niagara 2 years ago. Last year was in the NCAA tournament over at UNC Wilmington. This is going to be a tough team defensively that nobody's going to want to play. They've got a nice home court advantage out there in Morgantown. I do think that Ross Hodge does a nice job of getting this team towards the middle of the conference. I've got West Virginia at number 9 in terms of my projector or finish. Number 8, I go with TCU. With TCU, I do have some question marks with how these pieces are going to be able to fit together, but CJ Walker and seemingly his 500th year of college basketball after at East Carolina. Not a great 3-point shooter, but he's able to give you 14-plus points per contest. Does a nice job hauling in their rebounds. Jaden Pierre, he was a nice go-to guy over at Providence last year, mid-30s point shooter that's able to give you 3 assists. He was able to put in their 12.5 points per contest. With all the injuries that Providence had, he had to have a little bit of a bigger role than expected, and he did a relatively solid job in that role. Brock Harding is someone that I think is going to be able to do a nice job in this backcourt as well. After at Iowa last season, he was able to give the team some relatively good minutes. He played in a little bit more of an up-tempo system. Obviously, things are going to be a little bit more slow there, but we've also got a guy in Xavier Edmonds that I feel relatively good about as well. He's going to be able to help out down low along with David Punch. Punch is a guy that really saw some nice minutes for his back half of the season, became a nice offender, and Jamie Dixon's teams, when they're at their best, they're playing good, tough, tenacious defense for TCU. They needed to add a little bit of offense here in the offseason. I do think that Micah Robinson coming on in and coming into his own towards back half of the season last year is good to be able to provide that with Robinson. He was a true freshman that he did some nice things for the team. He was able to supply the team with right around about 5.5 points per contest. I recognize that his 3-point shooting was right around about 32% last year, but I do think that he's going to be able to take some nice strides forwards. That year 1 to year 2 jump after being a top 150 recruit, I think is going to be big for the team, and I do think that TCU finds a way to be towards the middle part of the conference, and Jace Posey, I think, has a little bit of upside as well, along with Lutarius Levicius, hopefully I said that correct, nice 6'7" combo player who comes on over from Oregon State to give this team a bit more on the outside as well. So, number 8 in my projector finish, I do go with TCU. At number 7, I go with Baylor. I just talked about one Oregon State transfer. How about Michael Rataj? And the fact that he, at like 6'8", 6'9", was just so good at Oregon State last year. Mid-30s point shooter, 17 points, 7 boards. Nice passer as a big man as well. He's able to give you multiple assists per game. I think that he's going to be able to fit this Baylor system relatively well. Obi Ebjim, he comes on over after he was at Wyoming, and he was really the dude over at Wyoming last year. 3.5 assists, 17.5 points per contest, shot 44% from 3-point. That's the sort of guard play that Baylor is going to need, especially after losing Robert Wright. You had VJ Edgecombe, who was all sorts of versatile, but I think that this team is going to be much better down low because you bring in Jocelyn Bodu. He was very, very rock solid down low. Andre Iguodala II, by the way, is a freshman on this team. Probably not going to see a ton of minutes, but that's a little bit of an upside guy there as well. JJ White they have coming in from Omaha after he was a rock solid guard for them that was able to light it up from 3-point range. Dan Skillings was a nice glue guy that was able to play some good defense and was able to supply Cincinnati with 10 plus points per contest as well. And then I know there's a lot of buzz around the freshman Ntonde Yesufu, who he at 6'5" is able to give you a lot of versatility. Not quite VJ Edgecombe level good, but this is a guy that's going to be rock solid. I think that his 3-point shooting is better than advertised as well, and I do think that for Baylor, they get back to a little bit more prominence. I don't think that they're back to being national title level good or anything like that, but I've got them number 7 in terms of my projector finish. At number 6, I do go with Kansas. Kansas does not have as much flash as a season ago. I actually think that they're going to be a little bit better than they were a season ago because Darren Peterson, great name, at 6'5", he's going to be like a top 5 draft pick. This guy is able to do a bit of everything, and I think the big thing for this team, who's going to be that main point guard for this team, because you bring in Melvin Council, who is a bit of a do-it-all player over at St. Bonaventure, and I do think that even though they don't have as much, shall we say, star power and as much brand name guys as a season ago, I do think that these guys fit the system a little bit better. Jaden Dawson, who he comes on over from Loyola Chicago, he was able to put in there 14 points, mid-30s point shooter. Is he going to be able to excel with Kansas? I'm not quite sure, but they do bring back Marco Jackson and Flory Banunga. Hopefully I said that correct. These two guys are some nice heart and soul pieces. And then Trey White, he's a solid player. And there's a lot of solid with regards to Kansas. Again, I do think that the facilitation is going to be a little bit in question, but with a guy like a Trey White, he's been around the block. USC, Louisville, Illinois, it's always been like a 10-point, 5.5 rebound, do your job sort of guy. Not a guy that's going to light you up from 3, but I think that Kansas is actually going to be a very good defensive team. The offense, I think, is going to be a little bit of a question mark. They're going to be relying upon Peterson for so much of that, but I think that this is a solid defensive team that they're going to be back in the upper half of the Big 12. I've got them at number 6 in my projector finish. Number 5, I go with Arizona. With Arizona, they do bring back Anthony De La Rosa, who I think that he is just so versatile, and he's going to be able to help out this team in so many ways, and you're going to need it if you're Jaden Bradley, because Bradley now has to see the lion's share of just so much of this offense after Caleb Love. He would always be the guy to take that shot. Now, sometimes Caleb Love taking that shot wasn't necessarily the world's greatest thing. He was very much a heat-check guy. One day he would shoot you into a game, one day he would shoot you out of a game, but you knew what you were going to be able to get there. For Bradley, he's a guy that was able to dole out right around about 4 assists per contest for a pretty efficient offense. They did a nice job not turning it over. They don't force a lot of turnovers themselves, but Getting back Montejuvis Krivas after he was limited just 8 games last season, that's rock solid, and that led to the rise of Henry Vassar. Him being out and him being at North Carolina hurts the team, but you know that Toby Awaka is going to give you good defense, and he's going to be able to give you good rebounding. Not a guy that's going to be dominant on the offensive side of things, but he's a guy that is very sure-handed with regards to his low post play. But the question becomes, who is going to be able to help out Jaden Bradley in the backcourt? You're probably going to be relying upon Braden Burris, a 6'5", a little bit of a wing for the same. Koa Pete, he's at 6'8". Is he going to be able to give you as much versatility as advertised? I'm not quite sure, but you also bring in a guy in Evan Nelson, who he was over at Harvard last season. He's going to be able to provide a little bit of leadership for the team, could probably come in off the bench, be able to knock down a few threes. With Jaden Bradley, I think that there may be putting a little bit too much on his plate, but I think that the versatility of Della Rosa and when you're going to be able to get down low out of Awaka and along with Krivas is going to be very rock solid to be able to keep this team towards the top 5 of the conference. I do have Arizona at number 5 in my projector finish. This is going to be a low for a lot of people, but at number 4, I do go with BYU. Lots of moving pieces. You bring in Robert Wright, who is a nice rock solid double-figure scorer over at Baylor. A lot of people felt like it was a little bit of an overpay, and it probably was. And well, AJ Disbanza is getting all the hype. He was rated either number 1 or number 2 based on your publication in terms of the top freshman in all of college basketball. At 6'9", he's able to do a nice job on the glass. He's able to give you some handles. He does a bit of everything. It is a guy in Xavier Stanton who's a true 7-footer who I think is going to be really impacting this team down low as well. And I think that the defense is going to be a little bit better this year. Kabakita, he's someone that does a nice job on the glass, but you also do lose a guy down. Hollow did a nice job in terms of helping out this offense. Now it's going to be left a little bit more to Richie Saunders along Dawson Baker. Baker, a guy that missed the entirety of the 2023-24 season, essentially was limited to 4 games due to injury. Came back last year. He was able to shoot 38% from 3, but he was a little bit more of a 6th man. What sort of role are they going to have for him this year? I think is a very interesting question because Saunders was a really nice scorer at about 16.5 points per contest, but who's going to be able to step up? Who's going to be able to facilitate without Demon along with Hull out there in the fold? You're probably going to be looking at maybe a little bit more out of someone like Dawson Baker. Nate Pickens is a guy that comes in for BC Riverside, though I don't know if he's going to have necessarily a massive role for this team. So a little bit of facilitation questions, but that said, I do think that BYU certainly going to be one of the better teams in all of college basketball, and I think that they've got a lot of star power. I've got them at number 4 in my projector finish. At number 3, because I do have BYU lower than a lot of people expect, it's not necessarily because I have them low nationally. It's just that I think a lot of people are underrating Iowa State. Iowa State, they bring back a lot of guys from a season ago. Now, we did see Iowa State fall apart in the NCAA tournament a little bit. They were dealing with injuries, they were dealing with suspensions, what have you, but I think that this is just a good core group that TJ Otzelberger has. He's got, once again, Taman Lipsby back in the fold, and this guy does it all. He's able to give you multiple steals, 3 assists, 7.5 points per game. Now, losing Keyshawn Gilbert and Curtis Jones in that backcourt, that hurts, but Milan Mimosilovic, he was a nearly 40% three-point shooter at 6'8". This guy is able to be very versatile. Would like to see him do a little bit of a better job on the glass, but still, you got to love the fact that you've got Joshua Jefferson back in the fold as well, who's able to give you 7.5 boards. He does a nice job in terms of generating turnovers. Just so much versatility there. I really like the pickup of Dominic Nelson as well. A no-nonsense guy that comes on over from Utah Valley. When he was over at Utah Valley last year, didn't shoot it well from 3, but he's going to be able to give you that good defense that you come to expect from Iowa State. He's able to put in there 14-plus points per contest at 6'5". He's able to guard multiple positions. And then Nathan Heisey, who he began his career over at Northern Iowa, has been with this Iowa State program for a little bit of time. Didn't necessarily see the world's most supreme amount of minutes last year, but you tell that they were trusting in him a little bit more, was able to give you a few boards. He's able to generate a steal per contest. I think that he's actually going to factor into things quite a bit for this team. He saw a few more minutes than expected with all the injuries last season, and I do think that adding a big man like a Blake Buchanan who comes on over from Virginia, that gives this team a little bit more rough and tumble down low. Eric Mulder is a guy that comes on over from Fort Wayne as well. So I think that this team has really good depth, which is something that you need when you play this style of just generating a lot of turnovers, and you've got a nice leader of the offense in Taman Lipsby who's able to do an amazing job on defense. So I've got Iowa State number 3 in my projector finish. Number 2, I go with Texas Tech. Bringing back JT Toppin is one of the biggest coups in all of college basketball. Like, this guy was just absolutely incredible. Missed a little bit of time due to injury, and you could tell how much that was impacting the Texas Tech team. When he was out there on the floor, how about 18 points, 9.5 boards, block and a half per contest. He's able to pop it from 3-point range as well. You just have so much there now. The loss of Darian Williams, there's no question about it, that is relatively big for Texas Tech, but I just have a lot of faith faith in Grant McCasland as a coach. I think that he's already become one of the better coaches that you're going to find in the country. Christian Anderson is back as well. He was able to give you multiple assists, 10.5 points per contest. That's going to be able to help fill in the fact that you do lose Williams along with Elijah Hawkins, who are your main facilitators from a season ago. LaJuan Watts has really good versatility, and I just thought that they made some nice shrewd moves with bringing in some wing players like a Tyree Bryan, who was a nice rock solid scorer over at Santa Clara last year, and I do think that Donovan Atwell is being slept upon quite a bit as well. Not a main facilitator over at UNC Greensboro, but a guy that was able to pop it at about 40% from three. I know that there are some question marks with regards to facilitation of this offense, but I think that Jazz Henderson has a chance to be able to make some contributions right away in the backcourt, and I do think that with regards to Christian Anderson, he and LaJuan Watts are going to do a nice job of being able to facilitate this offense, and I just trust in Grant McCasland to be able to get this team towards the top of the conference. I've got Texas Tech at number 2 in my projector finish, and at number 1, the real debate is Houston the number 1 team in all of college basketball, or are they just merely in the top 3? I've got Houston here. You bring back Milo Suzan. Milo Suzan did such a great job of being able to fill in the shoes of Jamal Shed, and as a matter of fact, I think they might exceed what Jamal Shed was ever able to do over at Houston last season. He was able to supply over 4 assists, gave you a steal per contest while shooting 43% from three-point range. Just absolutely amazing what he was able to do there, and I mean, it was a case where it was looking like they were going to be bringing in Pop Isaacs in the backcourt. I actually think that it's addition by subtraction that they decided not to. You're bringing a star freshman and Isaiah Harwell. He's going to be able to do a nice job in this backcourt along with Kingston Flemings. These guys, I think, are going to be able to flourish right away. And you still have that rough and tumble down low with having Joseph Tugler, who was a part of that title team last season. I recognize that he wasn't quite the impactful guy that you were finding down low in someone like a Juwan Roberts, but I mean, this is a guy that I think is going to be able to step up right away and maybe take a little bit of a step forward with regards to his offense because his defense is already there. Nearly 2 blocks per contest. He was able to supply the team with nearly 6 rebounds per game. I would have liked to see them retain Terrence Arsenault. He heads on over to NC State, and I think that he's going to be a rock-solid player over there, but I do think that this team, even though they might not be quite as deep as a season ago, Chris Sarnich, he's a 6'10" freshman. He's going to be able to help this team out right away down low. And don't sleep on Mercy Miller as well, a guy that hasn't seen a lot of minutes over the last few seasons, but I do think that he's going to be able to step up. He was a former top 50 recruit that was on the bench a little bit. This team has really, really good depth with regards to guard play, and even though the low post play might not be quite what it was a season ago, I think that Tugler is going to do a nice job of holding it down and make Houston one of the best teams in all of college basketball. And flat out, I just trust in Kelvin Sampson. So number 1 in my projector finish, I'm going to be going with Houston, and that'll wrap things up for the Big 12 Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast Hoops, now part of the Houston Family Podcast. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe